What I have for you is less a single coherent story and more a hodgepodge of different stories all strung together that have one common theme, and that is fireworks, or, the sort of things, the whole range of cool pyrotechnics that we can buy, ranging from the harmless things like snakes and smoke bombs and the snaps that you throw on the ground, all the way to gigantic things that, are potentially pretty dangerous and everything in between. As a child, there are a lot of holidays that I really enjoyed. Christmas, of course, because of the presents. Easter, because of, the candy and baskets and Easter egg hunts. Halloween for dressing up and the pumpkins. But I think for a long, long time, my favorite holiday of all was the 4th of July. And why? Because in addition to having the big fireworks displays that we would drive for a while to get to and, sometimes watch from our car, or we would lay down a blanket in a park and they would shoot them off overhead. Sometimes we'd see them down at Summerfest in Milwaukee at the lakefront. In addition to all of that, we had the smaller fireworks that we kids would play with leading up to the 4th of July, especially on the 4th, and then perhaps if we had any left over, the days after that. And, of course, the adults, at least some of the ones in my neighborhood, and also my Uncle John, would have some really cool fireworks of their own. And I don't even know how old I was when I started playing with fireworks, but I can tell you that growing up here in Wisconsin, things have really changed quite a bit. In the past, here in Wisconsin, you couldn't legally acquire, and in some cases even shoot off, the more expensive and more dangerous fireworks. So we were stuck with the sort of things that you could actually get at the store. And I would pester my parents into buying them, or maybe another kid on the block would actually have some fireworks, or, I would save up my own money to buy them at the grocery store or at the drugstore. And the things that we had, I've already mentioned snakes. These are these little capsules, and you would light them, and they would burn a little bit and make some smoke, and then a big charcoal thing would come out. And they came in different varieties. There were ones that were just black. There were ones that would make colored smoke. There were ones that would glow a little bit. The packaging was always much better than the actual effect. We had smoke bombs, and those were really cool. You'd shoot those off in the day. They were these little round balls for the most part, and they'd be colored, the color of the smoke that would come out. So you could get orange ones and yellow ones and green ones and blue ones, red ones, purple ones, even white ones as well. And, you'd light them and you'd see that little fuse glow, throw them and watch the smoke go. Later on, there were bigger smoke bombs that were even more fun than that. And those are the things that would kind of tide us over in the day. And then we had sparklers. Now, sparklers were actually kind of dangerous. They're essentially, filings of iron that have been amalgamated onto a metal stick. Sometimes you could get them on a wooden stick, but that wasn't very smart. And sometimes they'd have colors to them. Otherwise, they were just going to be white, and they would make sparks. You've probably seen them in shows and movies and stuff like that. Sometimes people will put them on a cake if they want to be particularly festive. And we would run around the yard waving these around. It wasn't that uncommon for you to get them too close to your face and get burnt a little bit, or sometimes you'd touch the thing when you weren't supposed to, even if it was out and it would still be hot and you could burn yourself. And there was a lot of firework mishaps that happened. But the things that we didn't have access to legally, but we got our hands on, were things like firecrackers. You'd have the regular size firecrackers. There were also these little tiny firecrackers called ladyfingers, and you'd very often get them in a pack, sometimes in a very big brick or string, and you'd light one and they'd go off in turn, or you could light them individually and throw them. We'd throw them at each other, or you'd stick them inside of something. And then we had bottle rockets, and bottle rockets are essentially like a firecracker, but with one end open attached to a stick, and so it shoots up into the air. And there were bottle rockets that would make sounds as they did that. There were bottle rockets that would just explode at the end. There were bottle rockets that would do other sorts of things. And we would, shoot them at each other, sometimes burning ourselves in the process, or down the street, you put them on the road and light them up and they'd go shooting. And, there were other things as well, poppers that you'd pull and it would shoot out confetti. There were a few other things, the snaps I mentioned, which were these little, white things, and you'd throw them on the ground and they'd snap, or you could actually snap them in your fingers, but that wasn't a great idea to do. And, over time they introduced other little fireworks as well. But the things that were really the big attractions were the kinds of fireworks that you couldn't get in Wisconsin. So we had a couple neighbors who did business in other states like Tennessee or Missouri or places like that. And I had an uncle, Uncle John, who I don't know where he got his from, but he always had fireworks. By the way, a little bit of a side note about Uncle John. So he's my mom's younger brother. And, my mother's family, the Lemrys, they speak French. They're all, French-Canadian by derivation. And one of the French words for firework, besides feu d'artifice, that was much more common is pétard, right? When you say hung by your own petard, a petard is a firework of some sort. And interestingly, Uncle John would pronounce it automatopoetically, not as petard, but as patow, right? Because they make a patow kind of sound when they explode. And so that's what I thought the French word for fireworks was for quite a long time. And people would sometimes look at me a little silly when I would ask them in French about that. I guess they thought I had a speech impediment or something like that. So anyway, various people would get their hands on other kinds of fireworks. And now we get to the things that were really cool, like big bottle rockets that would not just shoot up into the air and make, an explosion or a sound on the way, but would blow up and there would be sparks everywhere. And maybe there'd be a trail of fire behind them. Or fountains, things that you would place on the ground and they would shoot up sparks. Or Roman candles that would shoot colored balls into the air, right? Or sometimes you'd shoot them at other people or at things. There were planes flying at night that would spin and make sparks and go up into the air. There were tanks and cannons that would go along the ground and shoot fireballs out as they pushed themselves along with fireworks. There were even big things like mortars, where there were balls about this big, and you would put it into this tube and light it, and boom, it would shoot up way in the sky and make a firework that was, not quite the same thing as the professional stuff, but close enough. And in our neighborhood, we had the Scafitos who lived right next to us. And, Mr. Scafito would always have a ton of really cool fireworks. And then just up the hill, there were the Marises, and Bill Maris would get his hands on a bunch of fireworks. And, we'd usually go down to the Scafitos, but I also hung out with the Marises quite a bit. And they would have firework wars, shooting things back and forth into each other's yards. So, it was a real time for fireworks. My Uncle John, if we ever went to visit his and his wife's cabin in Michigan, he'd bring a bunch of fireworks along. And I remember there was a guy who'd actually fill up balloons with hydrogen gas or something like that, and he would light those off and it would shake the entire lake. the windows would shake. There were also, I should mention, bigger explosives like M80s and cherry bombs. And, we'd get our hands on those every once in a while. Uncle John would bring some down, or my Uncle Aim also would have them, or some of the local kids would get their hands on them. You had to be careful with those, though. Those are the things that'll blow off your fingers. And every 4th of July here in America, we have many, many injuries, burns, detonations, things like that. And it was that way back in the 1970s and the 1980s as well. So I was always very, very interested in fireworks, and always had a good time with them. As a kid, as a teenager, as an adult. And I used to get them, really all the way to my late 30s, especially when I lived in Indiana on my family's land at Chez Lemre's that I've told you about in other videos. I would take my kid Kat, and she and I would actually shoot off a lot of stuff in the woods by ourselves. I was very careful. I'd have like a punk, which is this thing that burns, and I would let her light it, and then I would grab her and pull her away from the bottle rocket or from the firecrackers or whatever, just to make sure that she was safe. But, she really enjoyed it. And then there was my cousin Nick, who's also my godson, and the three of us would pile into my car and drive up to the fireworks wholesalers up in, northern part of Indiana that's close to Chicago. And we just walk around the thing and take them all in and be like, well, maybe we should get some of these. We'd set a budget. Okay, we're going to spend $100 this year on fireworks. So that meant, we had to think about what we were actually getting. And we would decide what sort of things would create the best effects. And then the whole family would come outside from all three houses, and Nick and I and little Catherine, to a certain extent, would light them off. And everyone would ooh and ah, and we had a great time with that sort of thing. So that went on all the way into my 30s. And I remember when I was in Germany as a soldier in late 80s, early 90s, well, it would have been probably New Year's of 1990. I remember seeing all the fireworks people were shooting off, and I was like, people shoot off fireworks for New Year's? This is amazing. This is awesome, right? It wasn't like today where, at least here in Milwaukee, people are shooting off fireworks for every single festival and every single event. It was a special thing to see these brightly colored sparks and lights and explosions lighting up the night. So backwards a little bit, going back into my childhood, there's two things I want to talk about that kind of cap this story, and they both tie in with the same thing. Actually, it'll be three. So we would find used up fireworks around because people would be lighting them off. And we would try to see if we could do something with them. Sometimes there was some spare powder left in them that hadn't been burnt off or detonated or whatever was going to happen with it. Sometimes we would take sparklers and grind them down into things. And we would try to make our own fireworks. And the reason we would do that is because we thought fireworks were so damn cool. And I remember going to the Waukesha Library because our local library, the Delafield Public Library, wasn't very, good. Wales didn't even have a library. So we would go to the Waukesha Library, which is this big place. And I looked up in the card catalog, fireworks, things about how to make them. And I was so disappointed in going to the shelves and finding there was only like one or two books about fireworks. And when you got to the sections about like how to make them, the pages had been cut out. And I back then I thought, oh, somebody stole these pages. I actually think the library had probably taken them out to keep us kids from doing things that would get us into trouble or, hurt or something like that. Now, the second thing, I acted in a play. I've talked about this in another video about being at University Lake School and having a drama class. Every semester, we would have not just a drama class, but we would have a play that we were supposed to get ready. And I don't remember the name of this play, but I do remember that one of the characters in it was a man who was kind of a recluse. He was part of a family, but he was also a firework maker, a pyrotechnist. And I thought, man, that's what I want to do. That would be awesome. Can you imagine getting to like blow stuff up for a living and make really cool fireworks? And so I took that character and I acted him for that play for the entire semester. The other thing that I'll mention is there's some big fireworks factories and families that make the majority, or at least back in the day, used to make the majority of the big fireworks, the professional fireworks that you use at fireworks displays. And I didn't actually know this, and I think my mom made sure that I didn't know about it, but we had a fireworks factory just down the road from us. It wasn't in Wales itself. I think it was in between Wales and Genesee Depot. But it was the Bartolotta firework factory. And it employed a bunch of people. And I think it was either while I was in high school and still living on the border of Wales and Delafield, or I was in high school, or perhaps before I went in the Army, living in Waukesha. There was a news article about it because they had an explosion at the firework factory. And some people got hurt. I think a few people got killed even. And you realize, these are kind of dangerous things to work with, these giant fireworks that they use for the big displays. And, all it takes is something to go wrong, and not only one firework will go off, but a whole bunch of others. Had I known at that age that there was a firework factory, I would have been trying to find a job at that factory because I was so into these beautiful things, beautiful but dangerous things that we use for all of these fun times and celebrations. And I probably would have been experimenting and doing all that sort of stuff. Instead, I went in the Army and I became a combat engineer, which involved doing demolition, blowing things up, not with a lot of sparks and smoke and, beauty or anything like that. If you ever see a mine going off or C4 or TNT, it's actually kind of anticlimactic, although, seeing the effect is pretty cool. So, I still enjoy watching fireworks displays. I don't purchase fireworks anymore because where would I shoot them off? I don't have any land. We live here in an apartment in Milwaukee. You can't just shoot off fireworks any place that you want to. But I still enjoy looking at them and seeing other people doing stuff with fireworks. I kind of feel like the ubiquity of them, as I mentioned, people shoot them off, for pretty much every festival that you have around here. It cheapens it a little bit, but I still do like to look at the sky and watch the beautiful displays as they take place every once in a while. So that was a significant part of my life. I, talked about fireworks. I acquired fireworks. I dreamed about fireworks. I spent time, sketching out plans for making new kinds of fireworks. And, had things gone a little bit different, maybe that would have been my life's path. It hasn't been, but I think perhaps this could be at least of some interest to you to hear about my basically obsession as a kid, a teenager, even 20-something, with fireworks.